Okay. Do I need to give it back to you now, or?
Yeah, it's still disabled.
There we go.
All right.
Making it work.
We're in. All right. I don't have my talking points in front of me, so I'm just gonna have to go off memory. I had this great setup. I had my laptop on top of a television. So I had all of my presenter screen, like the next slide and note screen, were on the big television right beneath my laptop. And I stood back so they couldn't really see where my eyes were. So I was looking and reading my notes while I was presenting. So I don't have my notes memorized, I guess is what I'm saying. I had no idea what I said in this slide. So what I said is, 2019, I was planning on talking about technology disruption, right? And this is what I normally talk about, are things like blockchain, very simple technology, right? There's nothing complex about blockchain. So I like to talk about how it's very simple. Artificial intelligence as well, not terribly complex. It's just pattern recognition, technology applied to problem solving. But it's exponentially improving because of the computing power, and I love to go into Moore's law, but I didn't do that here. I would have. Autonomous vehicles are improving rapidly because of processor sensors and 5G, which is coming online. And then the feel-good story people like to hear about is renewables. We've got the marginal cost of renewable energy decreasing at an exponential rate. This is called price performance doubling. So as the price comes down, every time the performance doubles, which is in terms of renewables, it's both capacity and efficiency. Every time that doubles, you have a reduction in price, the compounding effect of which is exponential decrease in the price. So we are trending towards the marginal cost of renewable energy being zero within the next 10 years. So if you have it installed, you are paying nothing for it. That is going to have a tremendous effect on business models, right? And it's going to lead to resistance, is what I like to talk about. You're going to have the status quo trying to resist that change, right? You're going to have all the utilities still wanting to make money on it. You're going to have governments trying to hold on to oil production and things like that because there's a business model around it. Once the business model breaks down, though, once the democratization of energy occurs, it's a disruption. It's a huge disruption. It's a good one, but it's a disruption nonetheless. So that would have been my talk, is keying in on technologies like this, but instead I gave them 5 minutes because 2020 occurred, and you know what happens in 2020. And I made some jokes around murder hornets and Yellowstone exploding, whatever else. Who knows what's going to happen in the second half of 2020. All right, where are we going here? So then I changed the title of the talk. This was my innovation. I challenged them, and then I gave the conference the conference hosts kudos for responding how they did. This was supposed to be an in-person conference, and they put it all on Zoom. Did a really good job. So that was my moment to do that. Here I claim that I can't predict the future, and no one can, right? In some respects, it's completely unknowable, in which case it may be a complete waste of time to try to predict the future. But Abraham Lincoln or Peter Drucker, I'm not sure who said it, the best way to predict the future is to create it. And talking to a room full of, or a bunch of rooms full of entrepreneurs and innovators, these are the folks who would create the future. So then I said we'd be visited by 3 ghosts. I had these fancy little graphics.
Whoa.
Just different colors, yellow, red, and green. Some symbolism there, right?
Yeah, I like that.
So then the first ghost to appear was Ghost of Innovation Past. He has lessons to teach us. He has a bunch of scars. But we have to know where to look and what questions to ask. So 1919, post-World War I America. So chances are you knew someone who had an automobile, but you probably didn't have one in 1919. But especially in Iowa, right? There were no paved roads yet. So they existed. the internal combustion engine existed, Ford was making tremendous progress on assembly line. But you probably didn't have one, but you probably knew someone who did. Electricity, plumbing, not commonplace, especially in Iowa. Electricity in homes didn't become commonplace in Iowa until the 30s, in fact. There were no sewers, radio we talked about, TV hadn't been invented. You did not have a telephone in your house. So obviously just a very different way of living, but you had these 5 million people coming back from war, ready to create a boom in the economy. But Warren Harding didn't want that to happen. Prohibition didn't want that to happen. Religious revivalism didn't want that to happen. The train had already left the station, right? Gave rise to the Roaring 20s. So the transformation was the agricultural output we talked about, and this allowed people to start abandoning the subsistence ways. So big societal change as a result of that. Electric machinery, accelerated industrialization. The jobs were in electric factories now. They were not terribly fulfilling jobs, right? They were horrible jobs. So you had that shift where people used to create things. They used to have a livelihood. They used to have a trade, and now they're going to work in a factory. Big shift. Standards of living were improving rapidly with electricity, plumbing, telephones, TV, entertainment, everything improving. And then transportation. Really cool story about transportation. And this theme recurred. So there was this motor convoy in 1919 called the Transcontinental Motor Convoy. It was Dwight Eisenhower who led this motor convoy, of all people, right? Before anyone knew who he was. The proof of concept was that you could truck people and supplies across the country. So they left Washington, D.C. and ended up in Oregon or somewhere like that. And they drove the Lincoln Highway, which is Route 30. The cool thing about that is Route 30 goes through Cedar Rapids, and it also goes through my backyard here. So I was able to draw that parallel. You've probably been on Route 30, a couple times in your life, at least, I'm sure. It's called the Lincoln Highway because that's the funeral procession for Lincoln actually traveled a lot of Route 30. So it was given the name Lincoln Highway. But what happened when automobiles started traveling the Lincoln Highway was you had towns started to pop up with fueling stations, restaurants, and motels about every 40 to 60 miles. And the reason for that was the average pace of travel in 1919 across this highway was between 30 and 100 miles. So that caused these towns to be built, right? When you were going out on a road trip, you could make it about 40 miles a day, and then you had to stop, you had to refuel, you had to rest, you had to eat. So these towns would pop up on these major highways. They still exist today, right? No one designed where all of these towns would be, but this is Main Street America, right? And people trying to now hold on to it, and they want this to stay, even though it was never designed. There was no purpose to it other than fueling the automobiles that were traveling across the countryside. So pretty cool that that was a result of the automobile industry, or the proliferation of automobiles, right?
That's a really cool story. And I'm also looking at, I wrote down a note on this last slide. It's interesting to see how standards of living were going up while standards of working were going down in parallel. Yes, I can't disagree, but there's also a judgment statement about the standards of working, right? There, you're implying that a personal trade that you do independently, that you work on as part of your community, is more valuable than a factory job, which might actually be more economically rewarding, right? Yeah, I was thinking of it maybe for the individual, but not necessarily on the collective side.
Yeah, I would agree with that for sure. Yeah, that is really interesting. I don't think OSHA existed yet, right? There were no workplace standards. You had 10-year-olds working in these factories, I'm sure, right?
Mm-hmm.
It was probably a pretty shitty place to work. And there was no guarantee that like the breadwinner would come home at the end of the day, right? Deaths were very common in these factories, especially when the electrification took hold, right? Then you had these huge, powerful machines with no safety standards yet. Safety standards generally come because you learn the hard way. right? Someone somewhere died because they fell in a vat or something, right?
And this is the same time period when, what is that book, The Jungle, about the meatpacking industry? Same time,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, yeah. That might have been earlier, a little bit earlier, but you know.
Okay, cool.
It was all black and white, yeah.
Color hadn't emerged yet in the world.
Except for this light sepia color that I have in these slides. If you can see it, I colored every slide this light yellow to correspond with the color of the ghost.
Okay, all right, I'm seeing it.
Little style things.
I love it.
So then I introduced this notion of brittle complexity. I got this from, have you ever watched Alaska, The Last Frontier on Discovery?
No.
So it's this Kilcher family. They were homesteaders in the early part of the 20th century. Ewell Kilcher came over from, I want to say, Sweden, and established a homestead in Alaska. And when I was in elementary school, we used to have assemblies and we would watch the Ewell Kilcher home videos. So then when this show popped up on Discovery, I naturally watched it too, because now they still have the homestead going. And the artist Jewel actually is one of the Kilchers. So they're thriving, right? If they can produce a superstar in Jewel, they're doing something right. But the quote about brittle complexity comes from Ewell Kilcher, and he said it in like the 1930s. He said, there's something about living in the land that's simple and rewarding because the environment around has a brittle complexity that he doesn't want to live in. So that's why he chose homesteading. So I continued that theme here. I love talking about complexity as a math guy. Right, it's this nonlinearity, it's second order effects. It's when you underestimate how two things will multiply, and that you might actually get a nonlinear reaction between two things, right? Two positives might have a negative. So something like that might actually happen. But too often we make linear decisions, and when we make linear decisions in a complex system, bad things can happen, right? That's when, the office boss says, no more jeans allowed because too many people have been abusing it, right? It's this linear decision that I'm going to ban something, but there's this other thing that needs to be addressed, which is, what is abuse and why people are abusing it, and what liberties are they taking and why. And if you don't have that conversation, you're never going to figure out what's actually going on. Politics happens all the time, is linear decision making. All right, sorry, I digress. So I showed this cartoon, which represented the fear of the time, of all these new industries that were emerging. This was from 1899, but people were scared of powering the world. And at the same time here, they were scared of automobiles. They were scared of all this change. And the parallel I drew is we have it going on today. We have people who are against GMOs. We have people who are against artificial intelligence or robot drivers. We have people who are against the 5G network and claims it caused whatever, right? So we have the same theme persisting today. And it's when you have this unchecked technological growth is when you tend to see this theme emerge, is that people are scared of it. That's the brittle complexity. People don't know what to expect from this change. Obviously, this didn't play out. Not that I know of. But when you have all of these things compounding, you get this societal dislocation eventually. So in this case, it was the Great Depression. And I kind of did this slide silently. Just let them look at the pictures. My hope was that they were seeing similarities as to what's going on right now. I did not make that connection for them. I was hoping they did, right? But a hunger march, unemployment lines, whatever it is here.
This picture in the bottom left is catalyzing, to say the least.
Isn't it a great picture?
Wow. That has 2020 vibes.
For sure. You put all three of these together, it's what we have going on right now, right?
Yeah. Well done.
So then flash forward to 2006, the generational defining technological inflection point. You had renewables had not yet shown this price performance doubling pattern. And they were all in their infancy, right? Except maybe wind was not in its infancy, but the others were, particularly, you know, liquid metal batteries and things like that. They were not really a big thing. I talked about the iPhone. Artificial intelligence didn't really exist. If it did, it was a novelty, right? IBM Watson had a very small team in 2006. It wasn't until 2007 that they even decided to try to beat the Jeopardy champions, and that took another 4 years. And you know, Facebook didn't exist. Well, it kind of did, right? It was a web page. Twitter, Instagram, Yelp did not exist. Twitter came out in 2007. So cool stuff was going on in 2006 behind the scenes. You could not predict 2019 or 2020, which was my talking point there. I showed what disruption looks like. Typically I go in, have you seen the S-curve model for disruption?
Sounds familiar, but I'm not recalling anything.
So I didn't show it here. If I had a chance to do just my technology disruption, I would have shown it, but it's this, any business model or technology has this rapid period of growth where you have market leaders who are focused on expansion and growth. But then as you get to the top, you get diminishing returns on the performance. You continue to pump more money in and you get diminishing returns. So Clayton Christensen said you have this S-curve and then you get a second S-curve coming in under it, and that's a disruption. It's a reduction in performance initially that is able to exceed the performance of the original technology. So you take something like print media and you look at the early days of digital media, it was a reduction in performance, right? You had to wait for things to load. You had no business model around it. Only the people who were technologically savvy could access it. So print media wasn't terribly scared about it, right? But then the digital news media began expanding. As the web proliferated, so too did the digital news media. Business model didn't change much though. You still had journalists writing the news, right? Well, in the last 3 or 4 years, what we've seen is social media. You now have, I'm sure you're like this, if you're anything like me, you're getting a lot of your news from your community, from people who are not journalists, from people who are just maybe sharing a headline and sharing an opinion that goes with it, right? This is the true social media, and this is the disruption out of the digital media. And we're seeing all these, you know, Newsweek going out of business, all these other things going out of business as a result. Journalism model is dead. Second trend is the record company model. They used to store things on hard media, right? You know that. Along came Napster and iTunes, completely disrupted that. And in the last 3 or 4 years, along came streaming music, which has completely disrupted the digital download space. Third, and any responsible innovator would show this example, but you have the film wars of the 80s and 90s, Kodak and Fuji losing sight of the big picture, the digital camera coming online, right? But that only enjoyed maybe a 10 or 15 year boom before Instagram, Snapchat have now completely taken over the photography market and started to dominate things. So then I told a story about my mother-in-law who has a digital camera that she brings to the holidays each year. It has a picture of what it's taking a picture of, but she still looks through the viewfinder, right? She doesn't quite know how to change her habits. Yeah, she's certainly not on Snapchat and Instagram. Although she just followed me on Instagram, so maybe she's figuring things out. When this happens, we can't blame people because they're just going through this dislocation, right? So whether that's happening or whether it's my father keeping all his CD collections and still playing things off the CDs, right? There's this complete disruption from technology, but the combined effect is the dislocation. That was my talking point there. You get this generational dislocation, right? You have the old guard not even understanding how the young kids are living today. They don't get it. They think less of it. They don't want to live that way, and that is you're going to run into problems eventually. I shared my example. This might be my first ever selfie. It was taken last week. And I said, this was my point about the video. becoming ubiquitous. It still takes me 30 seconds to pull up a video and to start a video, but my kids can do it in 3 with their thumb. I don't know how they do it, but suddenly they're just recording a video. That has led directly to the civil unrest that we're seeing right now. That ability to always be recording, to always have things on, and that habit, right? I wouldn't think to film things. I may not even have the balls to film a police beating, right? But today's generation doesn't think twice about it. That's what they do. So complete societal dislocation. So the past was fun. That was the longest section of this. The present was, so we've moved beyond disruption now into dislocation, but still innovation's occurring. You've got SpaceX, you've got autonomous vehicle proliferation, you've got AR and VR advances, you've got 5G, none of this stuff's slowing down. But we just need to make sense of everything that's going on. And these things are not helping us make sense of it. And then here's where I start introducing the lessons. I shared some obvious highlights of the current conditions, the current crises, but we have businesses shutting down. We have entire industries disrupted. We have stores that'll go out of business because there's no business for them anymore. And we have stores that are changing their business model, right? They're doing what's called crisis innovation. All of these are doing this knee-jerk reaction innovation to maintain financial viability, right? That's their immediate concern. Innovate or die, right? That's crisis innovation mode. It will happen in crisis, and that it can actually, there's a spectrum that I talked about before. You have stuff that's accelerating change that's going to stick. There's a permanence to it. And you have stuff that's not accelerating. It's just a detour to get us to the next normal. And that's fine. Both are legit responses in a crisis. So the supply chain changes that we saw in department stores to try to get more toilet paper on the shelves. We have summer camps trying to figure out how to go forward right now, despite governors telling them they can't, but the CDC and the departments of health telling them they can, and they're trying to figure out how to deal with that. We've got the Zoom stuff that we've talked about, Zoom coming online. We've got things like telehealth, telemedicine. The bottom two are definitely here to stay, right? There's this permanence to these that we know that this acceleration is relevant. The top two, who knows whether it's supply chain, things will stick. But if you look at like the retail business model, stores like department stores, which have a 9-month ordering lag. So, you know, Macy's and those types of stores, they're already fully ordered for the holidays. They can't react to these crises. So these supply chain changes might actually be permanent. I'm not sure. It remains to be seen. You know, with JCPenney's and Nordstrom's and all these go out of business, then you know, the new norm is having a flexible supply chain. I can't remember my transition, but next lesson was creative tension. That was about constraints. So a lot of these things, a lot of these new innovations are coming from constraints. When you introduce a constraint into a system, it actually spurs creativity. And you typically think the opposite, right? You think you have this white space, this blue ocean that you can do anything. But the human tendency is then to create the most complex, you know, most complicated solution when you don't have constraints, and it's something that doesn't live on. But when you have constraints, when you have creative tension, something grounded in your current reality, going for a future state, that's when innovation actually occurs. This is something you can create in a lab, right? You can create this experience even in the best of times by pushing constraints on innovators. And they can actually do some really wild, cool things as a result. So I talked about resilience. So you're not hearing about the credit card companies right now because they have resilience baked into their business models. They plan for a 300% multiplier in their credit losses, right? Their credit portfolios have to remain profitable even if credit losses triple. So they can weather the storm. And then I talked about a local Iowa company, Renewable Energy Group, that I have a relationship with. They are very resilient because they built in this ability to take in any feedstock into their biodiesel plants. So whether it's animal fats, you know, restaurant oils, soybeans, wherever else you're going to get oils to create biodiesel, their factories are resilient enough that they can find the lowest cost feedstock and push that into their factories, where their competitors can't do that. They're built around soy entirely, or they're built around animal fats entirely. So they're doing fine. So resilience was the next lesson. Then I drew on Joseph Campbell here, talked about how this is our coming of age moment, right? When we're in a crisis, we're wandering the deep, dark woods. We're facing trials. And when we reemerge from the woods, we're going to be stronger. But the question remains, when we reemerge, are we going to actually have learned the lessons of the past, have learned from our trials, or are we going to fall right back into the old habits? So when the future guy comes, here's the dystopian view of society, 2045. This was all talking points, but like I said, it was, what did I say, 2038 Yellowstone eruption had just, you know, had still not cleared up. The rainforests were dying. People had moved underground in tribes, eating mushrooms, et cetera, et cetera. But I ended it with, the future doesn't have to be this way. When change is occurring, when disruption is occurring, you have 4 choices to make. You can put your head in the sand, ignore things, pretend like it's not happening. You can try to delay the inevitable. You can try to adapt to the new world, which is an actual pretty viable strategy if you're someone like Google Maps, right? Google Maps has never disrupted anything, but continues to adapt as new technologies come online. They just change their product, right? It went digital, it went mobile at one point. It has Street View, it has, you know, COVID stuff built into it now. They adapt. Or you can design. So when you're faced with all these pressures, any one of the first 3 leads to dystopian if everyone does that. But as long as there's some people who are choosing the 4th one, choosing to be in the driver's seat, choosing to create in times of trouble, then we're going to get through all this. So I talked about design and having a purpose, how the purpose was so important. I love this definition though, transforming existing conditions into preferred conditions. That's what design is. So again, it implies that there's these constraints, that there's this current, you have to have empathy for your current system in order to design the next system. You have to take it from where you are to where it's going. So final future view was the second half of 2020, which I said was a blank canvas. The people, and this is when I turned inspiring. It's the people in this room who need to start dreaming up the vision for the future. Don't have your head in the sand. Don't just try to delay the inevitable. No one's going to give you direction. Don't wait for the direction that'll never come. Go create, go innovate. We can build a better future. We can have desalination, renewable energy. It leads to a better planet. We can have blockchain and artificial intelligence, which leads to better health outcomes. We can have autonomous vehicles, which lead to better environmental impacts, more affordability, more safety. And we can have a digitally connected society as long as there's a purpose for it, something like justice or civil rights built into the design of our social networks. So then I talked about sustainability and moving beyond environmental sustainability and thinking about sustainability in terms of having a purpose for your business model, have something that's bigger than you, better than you. Improving the quality of life for communities. I chose this definition for that piece. So let's circle all the way back around. That's it.
Wow.
I said more inspiring stuff here, but I can't remember what it was. It was all fully scripted.
Brilliant. It's amazing. Really inspiring.
Yeah, you're getting a glimpse into what I do for a living now. That's it. That's what I want to do, is keep doing keynotes like this. It's a lot of work though. I mean, this one, what's the shelf life of this presentation? A month?
Yeah.
So I have to completely rebuild next time I do it. Yeah, what do you think? What welled up inside you as you
saw this.
Yeah, it sparked a few things to start. I'm curious, is there an assumption that, I'm wondering what the relationship is between people creating technology and technology creating people, or technology creating internal and cultural shifts in
Norms, yeah. Yeah, the point I kept making was that there's purposeless technology right now, right? We have a lot of it occurring. A lot of the stuff in your phone doesn't have a grand plan. It doesn't have a moral code that it's adhering to. If anything, morality is a constraint and not a goal of some of the stuff that's in your phone, right?
So we're defining purpose as it has morality to it, because it has a function, right? Like if you have some I'm going to call it a waste of time app for entertainment, it serves a purpose in the sense that you could numb out, or you could get a laugh or something, but it doesn't have a moral underbelly.
Yeah, I moved very quickly from purpose to sustainability. I'm trying to use that UN definition of sustainable development goals, because those, I believe, have more resilience baked in, right? If you are building something for the purpose of reducing poverty, or for the purpose of social justice, for the purpose of environmentalism, it's going to last longer, particularly if you figure out the business model around it. But we too often build things for the business model and not for the purpose.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm a diehard capitalist, right? So for me to be saying these things is a little out of character, but I truly believe them. You can marry purpose with capitalism and maybe get rid of some of the evils that people perceive in capitalist decision making.
Yes, I mean, there's this whole movement around conscious capitalism, and
it's a good term. Wish I'd remember that term.
But the thing that's interesting for me, though, and it's interesting the time periods we're looking at in 2020 and also 1919, is from a purely capitalist perspective, we need to look at the capital itself. And just 6 years before 1919, the Federal Reserve was created. Right?
Money from nothing, yeah.
Money from nothing. And we just did this. We just did this a month ago. I mean, we printed what, $3 trillion for all the different programs with COVID.
Yeah. And we bailed out the holders of the capital, right? The banks,
yeah. I think it was $550 billion went to the banks this month. I need to double check that, but
I don't know. But yeah, that's a good point. I should have built that in as a talking point too. That's your Keynesian economics, though, right? Is in times of crisis, rescue what you know. There's an assumption that what you don't know is worse than what you know, right? That's why we do the rescuing. I wonder if the correction in some cases would leave us better off than diluting the effect of whatever crisis it is. Do we need the correction? Are we just delaying it when we use Keynesian principles? If we had complete laissez-faire reaction to COVID, what would happen? If we had laissez-faire reaction to Great Depression, what would have happened? I don't know. No one knows, right? There's no control.
Right. And that's when we talk about the Great Depression, you look at the stock market crash and 1907. You look at 1907 and then also 1913. This guy over.
Yeah, what was 07?
The stock market crash. Or was that 09?
29, right? Was there another one then?
Yeah, there was 1907. There was a stock market crash. It was
Okay,
the end
so
of 1907. The bankers, the Knickerbocker crisis.
okay, great. It sounds familiar. I didn't do AP US history though, so I don't know.
The New York Stock Exchange fell 50% over a 3-week period in 1907. Cause of it is debatable, of course, many perspectives.
It was the Rothschilds.
Yeah, exactly. Right. It was J.P. Morgan.
On purpose,
Yeah.
so that they could start the Fed.
Yeah, you know, there's a lot to be explored there.
I mean, they bought the government from Woodrow Wilson, right?
Yeah.
I think it was Wilson, right?
Yeah. Well, that would have been Wilson, December 27th, 1913.
Yeah. So they bought him. We can rescue from this. Just give us control. So many people today think the Fed is a government agency, and it's a private bank. That's the craziest part, is we have a private bank overseeing everything.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. I think we could have a 2-hour-long conversation on the Federal Reserve and monetary stuff as it pertains specifically to the slide you just shared. I just wonder about, like, we were talking about conscious capitalism and marrying purpose to decision making, and how a lot of people create based on a business model, not create for a moral purpose, or with a conscious perspective in mind, more just how does this make money. And the thing that comes really alive in me in sharing all that is how narrow our time horizon is. I mean, it's all like businesses think on a 3-month time horizon, right? Earnings reports for the stock market. We think on a year-long strategic goal. Maybe we really stretch ourselves and start to think 5 years out. But what I really appreciate about your presentation is you take us back 100 years. And I know in a lot of the communities I'm in, we keep wondering into what would it be like to have entrepreneurs and 10% of business leaders, or 10% of the 1% thinking on a 5 to 7 generational time horizon. That to me automatically brings in purposeful decision making. And you can see how the sense of self expands in that also. Because now I'm thinking ripples out in terms of ancestrally, what are my great grandkids going to think of what I'm doing right now? How's it going to affect them? And also you start to see that we incorporate things like our planet into our decision making, because there's got to be somewhere for everybody to live. So I'm appreciating the wider time horizon and the more space for complexity, right? More variables at play when time expands.
Yeah, as long as it's not a brittle complexity, right? If it's I don't know what the opposite is. Is there a healthy, a strength in complexity? Is there, I don't know. I have to give that some thought. It's not something that'll break though, right? It's not something that will have victims, right? I think maybe it's okay if there's corrections and things breaking, but as long as it's not leaving a path of bodies in its wake, right? That's when it's bad. The point you make about the time horizon also, it's not just about businesses, but it's about governments too, particularly in our democracy, right? We've got every politician making short-term decisions to stay elected. They're not making generational decisions. Some of them, some of the altruistic ones will, but those are tough to get through as law, right? Obama did a good job having that kind of altruistic view of the world. Not too many others that I can think of.
Hmm.
There's a field in Austrian economics called, I think it's called public choice theory. My fellow Austrian friends would kill me for not remembering this right now, but it's just about studying how politicians are human beings too. You know, they haven't the Austrian economics is built off of man applies means to ends according to ideas, right? Man acts. And so human beings, we respond to incentives. All human beings are responding to incentives, right? Like weighing marginal cost and marginal benefit. But for a politician, part of the incentive is getting reelected.
Feeding their families. Yeah,
Right,
it's a basic human need.
Thing. So it's a career. It's not just like I go and I work in public office and now I am Jesus Christ. You know.
Trump thinks he is, but yeah. Yeah, and then systemically, you have these behaviors that have formed over 250 years of our existence, right, that are now the ones that have been shown to last, right? There's a Darwinism to the behavioral economics inside of politics. If you make poor decisions, that behavior doesn't last. Poor decisions to what you're describing, against what you're describing, right, which is meeting your basic human needs and against your incentive structure. So the system becomes self-reinforcing, right? People learn from it. They learn how to get reelected. They learn how to say the right things. They learn the little sound bites that work and get them reelected. Dangerous.
I'm also hearing all the birds in the background, and I'm hearing the birds in the background here, and I'm thinking about how some of the things we're talking about, like the Federal Reserve, for example, is so out of alignment with nature.
Yeah. There's no relation.
And there's a friend and colleague of mine. He and I have been wandering into this theme for a while now of what does return to nature mean? Both like how can we this phrase return to nature has come up in so many conversations we've had, both one-on-one with him, but also in communities I'm participating in and convening. And there's two definitions that come alive for that. One is return to nature in the sense of nature, our planet, and learning from the teachings of watching the birds or watching the trees, and how do ecosystems and the rainforest, how does that organize itself? How's that self-organizing, self-managing, self-transforming, self-adapting, right? Without a central bank, without a U.S. Congress, right? But also returning to our true nature.
What is the true nature? Have we lost it? Did we ever have it?
Yeah,
is it knowable? It may not even be knowable, but it's tough for me as an atheist to make sense of the world sometimes. And to me, I will always I'm maybe even a nihilist in some respects. Right? When we get into talking about the true nature of how humans should be, some part of me says there is none. And I don't like that. But it's just it's the pragmatist in me that says, if a human goes on a killing spree, there's no repercussion. It just happened. It's not any better or worse than anything else, right? We make it better or worse by assigning meaning to it. So what is our true nature, I guess? What do you think? What do you mean when you say that?
I mean, I don't know, right? I mean, that's a question. I think it's more of a question to live into than a question to try and solve.
I enjoy that part of it.
And I'll just say it is I noticed the word should, right? How should a human being be? That to me implies a judgment. Like there is a judger there saying left or right, black or white, yes or no, wrong, right, that kind of thing. So I wonder about, I'm always in this question of like, or I'm noticing there's a part of me that wants to judge and there's a part of me that has compassion. And so like, what's it like to be in the question of what's our true nature from a judgmental perspective? And what's it like to be, what is our true nature from a place of compassion? And just playing with that, going back and forth between the two and seeing what comes up.
You're saying that's a really pure form of compassion, right? It's judgment-free compassion. It's empathy.
Doesn't mean you tolerate anything, and it doesn't mean you tolerate everything. It also doesn't mean you have to make it right, or you don't have to judge it.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not claiming to know this. Like, it's not an answer. It's just an awareness.
Yeah. That's what's so hard, right? We've been searching for the answers our entire human race's existence has been searching for the answer.
Well, yes. I mean, yes. And what questions are we looking for the answer for right now, collectively? To be honest, I'm not even sure.
Yeah, I don't know if there is, because it's polarized, right?
Well, and we've become in 2020, especially in the United States, we're completely external. I mean, I don't even know if we're in a lot of internal questions like, what's the meaning of life or what's purpose? I mean, some of us are, obviously,
Mm-hmm.
but like as a collective, I mean, 85% of the US, is the United States in that question? Or are we just trying to keep building bigger and better and faster and more efficient?
Yeah, I keep going back to the word justice. That's what the ancient Greek philosophers sat with too. Right? How do you define justice? What is just? We haven't answered that question in 2,000, 3,000 years. At least not collectively, right? There's no common notion of justice. Yeah, is the U.S. participating at all? I got a bee buzzing around my head. Yeah, honestly, I don't think the U.S. should exist. I don't like federal governments. I don't like empires. That's the libertarian in me, though. the part of my identity that associates with being American is a really damaged, unhealthy part of my identity.
What do you mean?
I don't draw any reward. There's no sense of reward or no sense of pride in being American. If I once had it, I don't anymore. There's shame, right? There's negative words now that come up. Loss of control, shame, helplessness, ego, right? Those are the words that come up for me when I think about what does it mean to be American? It's not a good thing, but it's still part of me, right? I said the Pledge of Allegiance every day for 20 years of my life, right? How do you get rid of that? You don't. You got indoctrinated in some sense. In every sense. Because there is nothing, right? There's no, other than its history, what is the US? Nothing. It's arbitrary lines on a map.
Well, let's see, what is it? It's an internal experience of being an American, right? It's for you said ego, shame, pride. For others, it's for others, it's pride, joy, camaraderie, free, celebration, right? So there's an internal experience. As a person, externally, it's one of the most free passports in the world, I suppose. What is it? It's property. So that's something I want to come back to, actually, is the word property. I'm gonna write that down.
You talked about that last time too.
Yeah. Well, it's so there's the interior, right? I'm talking about individuals, collective, interiors, and exteriors. But individually and collectively, we have things like you shared, or maybe for someone it's pride, but then collectively we also have a culture. That's our interior collective. Our collective exterior this is Ken Wilber's quadrant model.
Just drawing out the 2x2.
Yeah. Collective exterior, it's laws, systems, institutions, technologies, transportation systems.
Systems in general.
Systems and institutions, right? But it's interesting for me because when I am I an American? Yes. Am I a citizen of the planet? Yes. Am I a being amongst all living beings? Yes. Right? Like where do you really feel home? Am I human consciousness? Am I consciousness? Just consciousness. But so for me, there's an identity piece. But then when you talk about America and being artificial lines on the earth, there's also property. Like property for me is a construct. It's interesting because as an Austrian, I'm like, wow. Or as a guy who studied Austrian and coming from that perspective, I'm like, okay, personal property is what gave rise to 2020 America. In the sense that everyone, our poor people have iPhones. And I know that's not true universally, but like the poverty line in the world is like $800 a year. The poverty line in the US is like $33,000 a year. I mean, we are so abundantly wealthy here. And where is there property in nature? Right? It's like a
great question.
Where's there?
You see it. I suppose you see it with birds. You see it with nesting. But it's certainly not a contract, right? There's no. I guess there's the self, right? You always have yourself as your property. So animals would.
a tree occupies a space that no one else can occupy. In some sense, there's property there. But it will, for its entire existence, it will not let anyone else occupy that space.
Well, I mean, maybe at the base of it, but the roots go down. I mean, the thing about nature is it's so clearly interdependent. Like this, the independence of the tree is so apparently an illusion, because there's slugs living in the tree, and there are birds living in the tree, and squirrels living in the tree, and
great. That's great. Yeah.
The tree is emitting out oxygen that I'm breathing in, and taking in carbon dioxide that I'm breathing out, and it's pulling in water out of the roots. And I mean, it's just the idea that the tree is this one thing separate from
right. I take it all back. You win. And the tree is made of dirt. That's the part that amazes me. The tree is made of dirt. There's nothing else.
Trees have these whole networks of trees communicate with each other and have these whole networks of conversation, and which ones need what, and
symbiosis. Yeah. Property as a construct, as a human construct.
Which has been incredibly helpful in us, I guess, civilizing ourselves, I suppose, like coming out of just our egocentric mind of everything in the world is mine. So if you're eating that ice cream cone, it's not even when I go over and hit you over the head with a club and take the ice cream cone, I'm not even taking your ice cream cone. I'm taking my ice cream cone that you were eating. Right?
Yeah. There's no your. That word doesn't exist.
Right.
They're mine. All right. It's the ice cream cone.
Yeah.
Huh. Sorry, I gotta turn that off. That's funny. It has been helpful. That's a judgment word, but I'll accept it. I'll let it pass.
Well, it's been evolutionary.
Yeah. So to the extent that survival is better than not surviving, then yes, it has been helpful. And you could use that judgment. So
yeah, good point. They just weave right in there, don't they?
But that's a judgment word. That's a judgment too, right? Is it better to survive? It reminds me of the theological argument for the existence of God. It's a brilliant argument. I think it was Thomas Aquinas actually who put it together. He said, if God is the greatest of all beings, then he will necessarily have the greatest qualities. And existence is a greater quality than non-existence. Therefore, God must exist. And it's a real elegant argument for the existence of God.
And what does God mean in that?
Well, to Thomas Aquinas, it was your Catholic, omnipotent God. But I'd like to think he was abstracting it to a prime mover of sorts, probably. But I don't know. It was a comparative religion 101 course. We didn't get deep enough into it.
Yeah, what came alive for me in that question was what would it be like for God to be existing and non-existing? Like manifest and unmanifest, aware and unaware.
Yeah, maybe that is better than existing. Huh. Having the ability to transcend. Take that, Thomas Aquinas. Hmm. What's the other part of the 2x2? Collective versus
Individual.
all right, thank you. And what is your individual interior then? Is that yourself? Is that your, what are the words that he uses?
Well, like when you were talking about as an American, you feel shame or ego, or that's an internal experience.
So the identity.
Yeah, the kind of I, yeah, the self. Maybe I'll just pull this up and share it.
Yeah, I'd love to see it. I don't know. Makes a lot of sense.
This is the Ken Wilber's AQAL, all quadrants, all levels.
Yeah. What's his field of study? How did he come to develop this?
He created what's called integral theory in the Integral Institute. He also, I'd say he, I guess you'd call him a philosopher. From what I know about him, he was in grad school at Duke and basically just spent 5 years sitting in a room and like studied all of human history and found these stages of development, or uncovered these stages of development that human beings evolve with and through. And he's an author. He's written many books. He sparked quite the.
Yeah, I'll have to check him out. I'm not familiar, but maybe I'll invite him into my interview series.
Do it quick. I think he's sick with something.
Oh.
Can you give me back the host thing so I can share my screen? See, we are adaptive. We are resilient. All right, here we go. Share screen.
We have ingenuity. That's the word.
Can you see this?
Yeah.
Yeah. So thoughts, emotions, memories, states of mind, perceptions, sensations.
Oh, I like these words, subjective, objective. That makes a lot of sense to me.
So we were talking a lot in the it's collective exterior. Well, in the presentation, and then we moved into all these.
Yeah, the it's is where your experience lies, right? Well, I guess the objective and the interobjective, but
I'd say your experience is in all of them. It's the one that I'd say our world right now, 2020 America, is pretty here. And then, maybe 2019 America, but I'm seeing.
Yeah, there's something going on right now, right? Something's happening here, but I don't know what it is, said Bob Dylan.
Yeah, the interiors are coming alive in the exteriors or something like that. I don't know how to say it, but. Does this spark anything in you, looking at this?
It's useful for I talked a lot about linear thinking earlier, and how a lot of our reaction to brittle complexity is a linear reaction. We take an action A expecting result B to occur. And I think it's because we don't consider all of the parts that all of these pieces play.
Mm.
You're right. When I describe that, it's generally in the it's where it occurs, right? It's a politician making a decision that bans something or orders something to be so, right? Very linear. but you could try to change the we instead as a politician, right? You could try to appeal to values. But that's so much more complex, right? It's so nonlinear. To understand how people's values were formed, to understand how they change, to understand where they are today and where to take them to a different place. And maybe our founding fathers were there, right? Is that why all these politicians always quote the founding fathers? Because they had a different level of consciousness, right? They had the we consciousness. That's really attractive in times of crisis, but that our system today doesn't reward.
Yeah, what's interesting to me too is to see, when you think about the founding fathers, how the we was actually seemed to be evolved farther than the it's. I mean, like just a basic level, all men are created equal in we, and then turn around and create laws with slavery in it's. I'm sure there's a reverse argument for that as well. It's not coming up for me.
Yeah, they had this aspirational identity, but they weren't willing to challenge the status quo in some respect, right? Beyond, although they had a revolution, so they were willing to challenge the status quo.
Yeah, and from an evolutionary perspective, I mean, could the United States have survived without slavery? Like, there's not a right or wrong answer to that. We could talk about it, but I mean, it's like, you know, if they had said no slavery in 1776.
About 1492, right?
Yeah,
Columbus took slaves
Columbus
from
slaves.
the people here, not from Africa, but he enslaved the natives.
Mm-hmm.
In that respect, probably not, right?
I don't know. That's sparked several things in me.
Yeah,
But you think about militaries, and it's like if oh man, I don't even know what question I'm in. I'm just sort of like, my awareness is moving faster than my thinking is, so I'm just kind of like
and language is so far behind, right?
I mean, seriously, it's just like near.
I get that way too. It's like, don't talk to me now. That's the last thing I need.
Stop. Yeah,
that's a limitation. As soon as you want to share what you're thinking, you know, you're constraining what.
It takes forever. I mean, through language, it takes a while to communicate what you're thinking through language, especially when you get into meaning. I mean, what do I mean? The words I'm using, or using the words what words are you hearing? How are you making meaning out of the words? It's just this whole.
Yeah, this language is not the best language for that. I'm positive.
I mean, like 90% of what people say isn't verbal anyway.
Say the right words. Communicate, maybe. That's a good model. Thanks for sharing that.
Yeah, enjoy that. I'm sure we'll incorporate that into our exploration.
Yeah, just like being aware of where I'm spending my time, or where I'm drawing evidence from for any argument I'm making. And to your point about the US, I think there are different forms, our tendency would be to draw evidence from one quadrant over the others, depending on what the form of that thing is. But that's probably out of habit, maybe not necessarily out of because it's better. I don't know, I gotta play with that more. The language is restricting what I'm able to talk about.
Well, I mean, I'm thinking of my at least my public school education. I mean, high school, middle school. I actually went to Aquinas Montessori when I was a kid, but then after Montessori, I went into public school. But I just think like 90% of classes were externally focused.
Yeah, more than that, right? Maybe not gym.
Maybe not gym, yeah.
Although as soon as you make it about competition, it is, right? When it's less about your body, more about the winning and losing. But yeah, I don't recall any classes.
I mean, you could take like an anthropology course in college. That's an interior. You could take I mean, I guess psychology, right? So I took psychology in high school. That was one class. I never took sociology. There was no anthropology. Language, that's an interior. So I took Spanish. That would have been
Sure.
interior. But like, you know, if you learn history, it's an external history, mostly. Just here's what happened on a chronological.
Yeah. All right. How often do you get to access someone's thoughts or feelings or emotions?
English class, I guess, could be interior. In English, language, psychology. But yeah, I mean, I took business classes. That's totally exterior.
Where do the sciences lie, though?
Science.
Are those exterior? Is math and physics?
Math and physics, that's an interesting one.
I don't know where they are.
Play on both sides a little bit.
They're just truth.
Yeah, math is like, I don't know. It's like not in the, it's, yeah, I don't know about math.
That's where I spent all my time, in math and music. That was all my time.
Yeah, I don't think math and music, they blend. They're in both and not in both the interior and exterior.
That was my whole high school career, was math and music. Nothing else.
What instrument do you play?
At that time, I was just a singer.
Oh wow.
So I was taking formal voice training every day in high school. I was in all the choruses, show choir, in all the shows, the musicals. It was a big part of me then. Now I play guitar. I picked that up in college. That's where I got my Bob Dylan kick, was once I picked up the guitar. You gotta learn some chords. You gotta learn some songs. Bob Dylan's a good place to start because his music is not very complex, but his lyrics are. It was weird as an introvert, right, to be spending my time in extroverted, performing arts. But it's where I got this I drew this energy from it. It exhausted me, but I loved it. Like being up on stage. Prepared me a lot for life. Learning how to perform, learning how to see myself through others' eyes. So when you figure that out, or hear myself through others' ears. That's a skill that served me well later.
Were you gifted at singing like your whole life, or do you feel like it was something you uncovered, or both?
Yeah, gifted's probably not the best word for it. Adept. There was a musical in second grade that we did, just kind of some short little dumb musical, but there was a solo part. And I don't remember how I got it, but I got it. And I remember being on stage in front of everyone's parents. I still remember the tune, right? It was about Pandora's Box. And I played Hope. I jumped out of the box and I sang a song. And it all started there. And I don't remember singing before that. I don't remember it being part of me. So I was maybe seventh grade then. Oh, sorry, 7 years old, probably second grade. And then from there, I remember in every chorus I was ever in, I became like the leader of my section. Because I could read the music, because I could get the right notes without having to learn it, right? I could just read the music and hit it. And so if I sang loud enough, everyone would follow. And then the chorus teachers knew that was happening. So they would, they'd spend extra time with me, which is rewarding too, right? Having the attention of a authority figure. Yeah, the actual tone that came out of me wasn't particularly interesting to listen to, but I was a leader through it, right? Thanks for letting me think of this. I never really thought about it. And it was this weird kind of enigmatic piece of my identity to others, right? They knew me as this quiet, withdrawn math guy. And then I would be in a musical and my whole family would show up. Like my extended family would be out there, hundreds, over 50 of them. My mother had 11 brothers and sisters, and my father had 10. So they'd be out there, right? And then the comments they would make to me were, I can't believe you do that, right? Everything I know about you is this, but then you're up there on stage doing that. And I don't know, something about that was strokes your ego, right? It becomes part of the identity. And now it's just a very interpersonal thing. Like I'll record music, but I don't play it for anyone. It's on my phone in my videos, but no one's going to see them. I just want to see how I hear, or hear how I see, hear how I sing. I use it in the speaking now, though, those lessons, the performing arts. Can I take a script and make it sound unscripted, right? I use that all the time. I will intentionally stumble over the same words every single time I read them, right? That's the performance, right? It has to sound authentic. So I design that piece in. I design, when am I going to pretend like I'm thinking?
That's fascinating. Stumbling for authenticity. Intentionally.
Yeah, I look up, like I'm searching for the words, but I know exactly what I'm going to say because I practiced it 3 times already, right? I used to do that in a leadership position at Transamerica when I was the chief innovation officer. When I had my staff calls, I'd have everything scripted, and I would be saying the things as if it was the first time I've ever said them. Intentionally. To sound genuine. Is that disingenuine? I guess it is. No, I would tell people though that I do that. so maybe it's not. Maybe it's okay.
Genuine. That's genuine. I'm genuinely being genuinely genuine, I think. I'm authentically being inauthentically authentic.
But thanks for. Now I figured out where it all came from. Though it was the performing arts. It was being on stage and practicing the inflections and practicing how are people going to see my character presenting these words. I guess I just pull that into the rest of my life. I'm a character, right? I'm playing a part. Huh.
I've really had a lot of fun doing this. I love your presentation. It's really
Yeah. Thanks for asking me to share it because I wanted to show it off a few more times before it gets old.
yeah.
I don't think I'm gonna get paid for it again. I can make a push, but we'll see.
Before I end this recording, just tell me where did you share it again?
It was a conference called EntreFEST, ENTREFEST, out of Cedar Rapids, Iowa.
Cool.